Wow. What those state leaders have accomplished to support the earliest years is truly amazing. And I'm grateful that they've all shared their stories with us. We all have so much that we can learn from them. So far during the summit, we have shared with you why we need a prenatal to 3 state policy roadmap, because we know that the most important thing that we can do is to ensure that all children are born healthy and raised in nurturing environments. But we also know that not all children have the opportunities that they deserve. And we see systematic differences from birth based on children's race and ethnicity and where they live. And state policy choices influence these disparities and opportunities. Kaylee also introduced our new roadmap to you, and we hope that you've taken a moment to begin to explore the roadmap that we've created that identifies the most effective investments that states can make to foster the environments that science tells us are necessary for infants and toddlers' healthy brain and body development. And the 5 policies and 6 strategies that we outline in the roadmap combine to create the system of support to empower parents and allow children to thrive from the start. So now I'd like to share with you more about the roadmap, specifically the impact that the policies and strategies have on improving outcomes for infants and toddlers and their caregivers, or more about why these solutions actually matter, as well as detailed information on how the effective solutions are being implemented across the states. In particular, I want to highlight for you the substantial progress that many states have made over this past year. 5 states have fully implemented at least one of the roadmap policies for the first time this year, and Missouri implemented 2. But these impressive achievements are just really the tip of the iceberg. State leaders were actively pushing policies to strengthen families. And the momentum across the nation to support the prenatal to 3 period is strong, and it provides me with hope that we'll finally prioritize children in their earliest years. So this roadmap framework illustrates how each of the evidence-based policies impacts the prenatal to 3 policy goals. The 5 policies that are included in the roadmap provide families with the broad economic and family supports that they need to provide for their children, and they also positively impact children's health and well-being from birth. So the policies include expanding income eligibility for health insurance through expanding Medicaid, which leads to healthier birth outcomes and reduced financial hardships that are caused by out-of-pocket healthcare expenses. Currently, 39 states have expanded Medicaid, which extends the income eligibility threshold for adults to qualify for Medicaid to 138% of the federal poverty level. And in non-expansion states, no childless adults are eligible for Medicaid, and income eligibility thresholds for parents range from a low of 17% here in Texas to 100% of the federal poverty level in Wisconsin. This past year, Missouri and Oklahoma expanded Medicaid, which allowed nearly 500,000 more people to access the program for the first time, which we know is especially important during this year of COVID. Even more heartening is that 11 out of the 12 states that have not yet expanded Medicaid introduced legislation or tried to launch a ballot initiative to expand it this past year. However, despite a strong incentive from the American Rescue Plan for non-expansion states to expand Medicaid, none of the 11 states was successful. Reducing administrative burdens to allow families access to the benefits that they are eligible for is one of the simplest and most cost-effective policies that states can implement. We use the example of SNAP, which is the most effective nutritional program that we have in this country. A family of 3 with an income below 130% of the federal poverty level can receive over $500 a month in SNAP benefits to spend on food. And nearly a quarter of children under the age of 3 live in households that receive SNAP. But what's troubling is that almost 12% of households who are eligible for SNAP don't receive it. And this lack of access varies substantially across states. So research shows that states can implement a bundle of administrative policies to increase participation among those who are eligible. Specifically, states can extend the recertification interval to 12 months. They can allow for simplified reporting so that families only have to report income changes that will affect their eligibility, and they can provide all the services online. And currently, 26 states offer this combination of policies to reduce the administrative burdens that families can face in accessing SNAP. This past legislative session, Texas introduced a bill to extend their recertification interval from 6 to 12 months, but the bill didn't pass. And in Minnesota, they codified their 12-month recertification interval into law this year. But other than that, there was very little legislative or administrative activity related to SNAP. A paid family leave program that provides a minimum of 6 weeks of paid leave from work following the birth, adoption, or placement of a child in foster care increases the likelihood that the parent will return to work. It increases household income and reduces poverty. And access to paid leave also improves the mother's physical and emotional health. It increases the bonding between the parent and the child, and it leads to improved child outcomes, including reductions in trauma. Currently, 6 states offer a paid family leave program of at least 6 weeks. And this includes Massachusetts, who began offering 12 weeks of paid leave to new parents for the first time in January of this year. New York extended its 10-week program to 12 weeks beginning this year. And New Jersey and Washington also offer 12 weeks. New parents in California and DC have access to 8 weeks of paid leave. 4 other states have adopted policies that will take effect in the next several years. For example, this past year, Rhode Island voted to expand its 4-week program to 6 weeks, beginning in January of 2022, and then to 8 weeks in 23. Connecticut will begin offering its 12-week paid leave program next year. Oregon will offer its program in 23, and Colorado is scheduled to begin providing 12 weeks of benefits in 2024. And what's exciting is that 23 states introduced legislation this year to adopt a paid family leave program of at least 6 weeks, and 19 of these states sought a 12-week program. And this level of legislative activity really demonstrates the strong desire for this effective policy across the country. And we'll wait and see if a federal program is signed into law, and currently that would provide families with 12 weeks of paid leave beginning in July of 2023. A state minimum wage that's at least $10 an hour not only increases household resources and reduces poverty, it also leads to healthier birth outcomes. It leads to lower levels of neglect and improved health outcomes for children, and those outcomes have beneficial impacts throughout their school years. Currently, 22 states have a minimum wage that's $10 or greater. And this includes Florida, Missouri, and New Mexico that all crossed that $10 threshold this year. 3 additional states, Delaware, Nevada, and Virginia, will have at least a $10 minimum wage next year. 9 states have a state minimum wage that is above the federal minimum of $7.25 an hour, but not quite to that $10 level. But many of these states have scheduled increases to raise their minimum wage in future years. Today, the District of Columbia is the only state that offers a minimum wage of more than $15 per hour. But California is scheduled to increase its minimum wage to $15 next year. And at least 10 other states have increases scheduled to reach that threshold by 2026. In 20 states, the minimum wage remains at the federal minimum, which has not been increased since 2009. But interestingly, each of these 20 states introduced legislation this year to adopt at least a $10 minimum, but unfortunately none was successful. Finally, a state earned income tax credit that's refundable and at least 10% of the federal EITC substantially boosts employment and household resources, and it also reduces disparities in adverse birth outcomes. 18 states currently have an EITC that's at least 10% of the federal EITC, and Indiana and Washington will join these states next year. The generosity of these states' benefits currently ranges from 10% in Nebraska and Colorado up to 45% of the federal credit in Maryland. And 5 of the 18 states that are already over the 10% threshold voted to expand their state EITC benefits this year. 4 other states adopted legislation this past year to offer a state EITC, but the benefit levels are less than 10% or they're not refundable. And 11 other states considered but didn't pass legislation for a state EITC. But altogether, 36 states introduced EITC legislation, which speaks to the broad support that this effective policy has across the country. One important note is that we are not advocating for any particular policy or benefit level, We set these minimum thresholds for the policies based on the most rigorous evidence that's available to date. But as states begin to implement more generous paid family leave programs or higher minimum wages, for example, we'll be able to determine the impact that these expanded benefits have on prenatal to 3 outcomes, and then we can update the roadmap accordingly. The 6 roadmap strategies provide more targeted interventions for families to ensure that their specific needs are addressed. The difference between a policy and a strategy is that the research provides clear guidance as to what states should do to reap the impacts of an effective policy. For a strategy, however, the evidence is clear that it improves prenatal to 3 outcomes. It works, but the evidence does not yet provide clear guidance on how states should implement or fund the strategy. So for strategies, we do not indicate whether a state has fully implemented it or not with a yes or a no, the way we do with policies. Instead, we've identified a handful of states for each strategy that we call leaders or states to watch because they're serving more eligible families relative to other states. They're using innovative funding mechanisms for the strategy, or they've made substantial investments in the strategy. We recognize that there are a lot of states doing innovative things, and we try to capture these initiatives in the roadmap, but we also know that we have more to learn. One effective strategy is comprehensive screening and connection programs. These programs are effective at identifying the specific needs that a family has and connecting the family to the services that will help them to meet those needs. The 3 models that have been rigorously evaluated are Dolce, Family Connects, and Healthy Steps. And some combination of these 3 effective models are available in 28 states. Although to be fair, in most states, a relatively small number of families have access to these programs. In this past year, New Jersey and Connecticut passed legislation to implement the Family Connects model, joining Oregon as one of only 3 states that plan to implement this program statewide. The Family Connects model greets new parents in the hospital right at the child's birth, and it offers a home visit by a nurse approximately 3 weeks later to assess the family's needs and to link them to the services that they need. Also, this past year, Maryland and California made substantial investments in the Healthy Steps model, which supplements the child's pediatric well visit with a developmental specialist who assesses the needs of the family and makes sure that those needs are addressed. Several states offer their own alternative model to screening families and connecting them with services, which seems very promising. And we're hoping that the program models will be rigorously evaluated to provide more options to states. Child care subsidies provide an essential resource to families to help them to access affordable child care. And research shows that higher subsidy reimbursement rates increase employment and lead to greater stability in child care arrangements. But too frequently, reimbursement rate levels are set below the amount that would be necessary for families to access high quality care or for child care providers to pay their teachers a living wage. State leaders in child care subsidies set their reimbursement rates at levels that cover the true cost of care, and they have reasonable expectations of what the family can pay in copays. The combination of these 2 policies lead to families being responsible for a relatively small percentage of the overall price of care. This past year, Oregon, Rhode Island, and Washington enacted bills to cap family copayments at no more than 7% of income, and Vermont passed legislation to ensure that families with incomes below 150% of the federal poverty level do not pay copayments. Washington's legislation also increased reimbursement rates. It implemented an infant care rate incentive, and it will develop a cost model for care rather than merely relying on a market rate survey. New Mexico and DC also use a cost model to determine a truer cost of providing care that takes into account adequate teacher salaries and appropriate staffing to ensure quality care. Unfortunately, in many states, the reimbursement rates are set considerably below the market price of a region and even further below the true cost of care, leaving parents responsible for making up the difference or seeking lower quality care. And co-payment rates vary a lot. For example, for a family of 3 with an income of 150% of the federal poverty level, the copayment would be 0 in South Dakota and Utah, but it's over 30% of a family's income in Hawaii. In 7 states, families with this income level will be responsible for about half of the total child care bill. For more information on childcare subsidies, I encourage you to check out all of the graphics in the childcare subsidy profile in the roadmap. We recognize that many states have updated their reimbursement rates as of just October 1st, and we will update the information over time to reflect these changes. And for now, though, the information in the roadmap was all current for all states as of July 1st. Group prenatal care typically serves pregnant people with low-risk pregnancies who don't require individual monitoring. The groups include up to 12 people of similar gestational age and who meet every 2 to 4 weeks, totaling up to 20 hours in prenatal care over the course of their pregnancies, compared to only 2 to 4 hours in traditional individual care. 9 states provide an enhanced reimbursement for group prenatal care through Medicaid to encourage doctors to offer the approach. And these enhancements range from $7 up to $50 per person per visit, depending on the state. Birth outcomes are typically the same in group or traditional models, but pregnant women are more likely to receive adequate prenatal care, and they benefit from the social inclusion of the model, which leads to better perinatal mental health outcomes. The centering pregnancy model is the predominant group prenatal care model and the model that's been studied the most rigorously. And services were somewhat disrupted during the pandemic, but in 2019, women could access centering pregnancy in 46 states. And the number of women with access is relatively low, however, ranging from less than 1% of births in Arkansas and Tennessee to over 14% in DC. 3 states, Maryland, Illinois, and Ohio, took legislative or administrative action this past year to expand access to group prenatal care services, with the hope of creating enhanced and more equitable perinatal opportunities and outcome. Given the critical role that parents play in shaping children's early development, improving parents' knowledge and social support and coping skills, as well as connecting families to community and health resources during the prenatal and early childhood periods through evidence-based home visiting programs, promotes positive long-term child development. Teaching parents the skills for warm and responsive caregiving can buffer the long-term negative effects of childhood stress and adversity. States can choose from 7 home visiting models that are designed for pregnant women or for infants and toddlers, and the models that have a significant impact on improving parenting skills. On average, approximately 7% of eligible families are served by these models, but this varies from less than 1% of eligible families in Nevada to over 35% in Iowa. And although most funding for home visiting programs comes from the federal McVie program, states use a variety of funding mechanisms to supplement the federal dollars. In particular, 23 states use Medicaid to fund components of home visiting services, including Illinois, that passed a law this past year to expand the use of Medicaid to fund home visiting as part of a larger health equity initiative in the state. Early Head Start is a federally funded program that serves pregnant women and infants and toddlers and their caregivers in families with lower levels of income. In rigorous evaluations, the program has been shown to promote healthy social, emotional, cognitive, and physical development in young children, to also assist parents in developing positive parenting skills and moving toward their self-sufficiency goals, and to bring together community partners and resources to provide families with the comprehensive services and support that they need. Across all states, the estimated percentage of eligible children with access to Early Head Start ranges from less than 4% to over 31%. And although access is typically driven by local grantees within a state, by providing supplemental funding to Early Head Start, states can increase the share of eligible children with access. The 7 state leaders support Early Head Start by contributing state-level funding or adopting and funding a state-based program with a structure and quality standards that are very similar to Early Head Start. Nebraska, Illinois, Oregon, and Washington all have state-based programs that build on Early Head Start standards, but expand the program to more families. Over the last year, Maine, Oregon, and Washington all passed legislation to further invest in expanding Early Head Start programs. Finally, early intervention, sometimes referred to as Part C, offers services for infants and toddlers who have disabilities or developmental delays, regardless of a family's income. And the most rigorous evidence suggests that early intervention services can improve young children's cognitive development, language and communication skills, behavior and motor skills, and reduce the children's need for services as they get older. State EI programs vary considerably in the percentage of children under age 3 who are served. And they also vary in their eligibility criteria, the funding streams that states access to support the programs, the level of collaboration between Part C programs and other state agencies such as Medicaid and child welfare, and in other ways that have implications for the strength of the state's program. The share of children served is one of the only indicators that allows for a consistent, meaningful comparison of states' EI programs. In most other ways, states' programs are so different and context dependent that it's difficult to compare them to one another. National research suggests that the prevalence of children under age 3 with delays and disabilities whose development could actually improve with EI services is somewhere between 13 and 20%. But recent national data show that just over 7% of children in the US under age 3 received any EI services over a 12-month period. But this percentage varies considerably by state, from a low of approximately 2% in Arkansas to a high of 22% in New Mexico. Massachusetts is another standout state in the percentage of children served, with over 20% of infants and toddlers receiving EI services over the course of a year. Experts suggest that states should maximize use of Medicaid to fund services to expand access to EI. Several states passed legislation this past year to expand access to EI. For example, Delaware passed a bill that will require child care providers to ensure that children between the ages of 0 and 5 are screened to identify developmental delays and any social-emotional needs that they have. Delaware also changed the agency that administers its EI program in an effort to provide a more seamless transition for infants and toddlers from Part C services to 3 and 5-year-olds in Part B services while they're in pre-K. And both programs are now housed under the state's Department of Education. Additionally, Illinois passed legislation to allow toddlers who turn 3 during the summer to continue to receive EI services until the school year begins. And Connecticut passed legislation that eliminated the collection of family fees, which will expand access to services for lower income families. So as you can see, there was a lot of activity within states this past year to adopt policies and expand benefits available to families to help to empower parents and to ensure that children get off to a strong start and thrive. And I hope this momentum is motivating to other states because there is still so much more that needs to be done. 4 states, California, the District of Columbia, Massachusetts, and New Jersey, are implementing all 5 of the effective roadmap policies. And at least 3 additional states, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Washington, will join this group next year. However, there are 7 states that have not implemented any of the effective policies yet, and another 12 states that have fully implemented only 1. And so families in these states lack access to benefits and services that could enhance their opportunities to care for their children. I only scratched the surface of the information that's available in the roadmap, and I encourage you to use it as a resource as your state develops and implements policies to build a stronger and more equitable prenatal to 3 system of care. Remember, the most important thing that we can do is to make sure that children experience nurturing environments in these earliest years with limited exposure to adversity. These environments set the stage for all subsequent health and well-being. And state leaders now have the information on the most effective investments that they can make to foster these environments. These state policy choices can have lifelong benefits for the child, for the family, and for society.